Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 21st of Feb 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comments. Coming up in the show, PlayStation 4. Oh, you didn't see that one coming, did you? Yeah, the whole show is going to be about PS4. Hell, the next show might be about PS4. There's a lot to talk about. It's probably the biggest thing in gaming right now, as you might imagine. So, let's talk about it. Sounds like a good idea. So, I sat around watching the entire Sony conference from start to finish, and I'm going to go down point by point and talk about everything that we actually saw there. Try and save you a little bit of time as well, because it is about 2 hours of waffle. So, we'll try and break it down and get to the important parts. So, first things first, specifications. Pretty light on the details here, using stuff like enhanced PC architecture, supercharged PC architecture. It's like, yeah, this is blast processing all over again. No, it's not supercharged PC architecture. We know for a fact that this system is not as powerful as the highest end PC that's available right now, so let's not pretend that it is. What it does indicate, though, is that it is PC-like architecture in the sense that it is an x86-based processing system. This is a good thing. Maybe. Now, here's the thing, right? Cell architecture, the stuff that the PS3 was based on, nothing like a PC. And honestly, comparing PCs to consoles by looking at tech specs is always stupid, simply because the architecture of the systems are just so ridiculously different. You can't compare them directly. I'm going to be entirely honest here. I do not know the ins and outs of instruction set architectures. I have no idea. That's the kind of thing you're going to have to ask a programmer. What I do know, however, is that creating a console based on x86 architecture means that porting games from one thing to the other is easier. One of the biggest problems that Cell has had up to this point is the difficulty of development. It's a completely different setup. It's tricky to dev for. In fact, when we first heard about the PlayStation 3, there was a huge amount of buzz surrounding it, saying, oh god, this thing is a nightmare to code for. I believe was it Lionhead that said that? I think it was back in the day. It was a long time ago. Basing it on the x86 architecture makes a little bit more sense. It hopefully means that porting between the two machines will be a little bit easier, and what's probably going to happen is the PS4 will be treated as a low-power consumer front-room PC. And a lot of the functionality they were showing is very PC-like in nature, although, of course, it is naturally more limited. Now, while PC snobs may turn their nose up at this and say, oh, well, why would I want this thing when I have a machine that's already more powerful? Which is true, you might, I do, no question about that. Well, the thing that you should consider is that this potentially could mean that we get a lot better ports. Yep, we get ports that are coming from the PlayStation 4, and we're getting ports that aren't horribly messed up. That's the hope. Up to this point, we've been getting a lot of ports from the 360, and, well, you've seen the result of a lot of those. Anything with the Games for Windows Live moniker on it, have a look at that, see, oh, was that on 360 as well? Was this a good port or not? Usually it isn't. Yeah, it's not a great port at all. I mean, Dark Souls, of course, being one of the worst possible examples, as well as quite a few other titles. I could see this potentially being good. It's hard to say, really, because this could develop into a situation where, because it's so close to PC architecture, it means that this is going to get completely outperformed way, way faster than something like, say, the Cell processor, which is something that took quite a long time to really unlock the full potential of. We could be entering a new era that starts off really well, and we have a year or two that's really, really good, and great games are coming out, a lot of power's being put into them. We're getting that kind of technical prowess that we're looking for, and then, of course, suddenly things could taper off, and we enter this situation where, unlike, say, the PlayStation 3, where it took a while for people to really figure the Cell processor out, people have already figured out the x86-based CPU and said, yep, this is as far as we can go with it, GG. We are just going to have to start cutting back on technical stuff now, and we're going to have to start making games in 720p again. We're going to have to start making 30 FPS, 25 FPS. We're going to have lower FOVs, bigger gun models, lots more tricks, smaller multiplayer modes, and so on and so forth. But that's potentially bad. The other possible problem with this thing, and this is just speculation, I'm really interested to hear from devs on this. Obviously, we don't have a lot to go on here, except for what Sony's shown us. What I'm expecting to hear over the next few months is how easy it would be to co-develop for PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. We're gonna have a transition period. We always do every time we jump to a next generation. pretty long transition period more often than not. Especially in this case, we have very, very large installed user bases, and people are perhaps less willing to jump on the next gen. They weren't exactly willing to jump on the next gen when it came out in the first place. I remember the Xbox 360 coming out. Hell, I worked in game, I was selling the bloody things while that was happening. And people bought them, but they didn't buy them in large numbers. I mean, it took a long time for people to really start buying these things. The release of Gears of War was one of the first real killer apps for it, and then obviously a lot of people bought it when Halo 3 came out for that machine, and so on and so forth. The adoption rates were fairly slow, and eventually, after 7 or 8 years, the console, of course, is in a lot of people's homes. How difficult is it to co-develop for PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. These are, of course, entirely different systems, and this time it looks like, unless, of course, Microsoft surprises us at E3, that the next generation will start in the holiday season of 2013, and it will be Sony that gets out the gate first instead of Microsoft. So we enter this really odd situation where we're thinking, well, these systems are so radically different. What happens if a lot of developers shy away from making PlayStation 4 versions of their games simply because they know they'll sell better on PS3, because there are more installed users? Does that mean that technology gets held back again? Does that mean that the PlayStation 4 has a very poor launch library? Does it run into the Vita problems that we're having right now, where they're just not making games for the system? Because if it does, then that's going to be a bit of a problem. Now, compounding this potential release problem is the fact that we know this system is not backwards compatible. They have said that it is not backwards compatible. It doesn't have a cell chip in it. You can't run PlayStation 3 games on it. What they have said is you will be able to play PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 games via the PlayStation Cloud using the Gaikai system. Now, we knew since like last year that Sony had purchased Gaikai. Now, the question then becomes just exactly how they're going to implement the cloud system. There was little mention of playing games on the PlayStation 4 using the cloud system and actually using PlayStation 4 titles. There was mention of the idea of being able to play titles before they finish downloading. Now the question is, how do they do that? Do they use the Gaikai streaming system, which means you're essentially running the game off of a cloud server until you've downloaded the whole thing and it's just streaming to you, which might be a good system, but obviously, you know, we've seen OnLive, and OnLive did have some decent points, and then there were other games where it really didn't perform very well. Is it running that way, or is it a more Blizzard-like technology? Something that we've seen in World of Warcraft, something that we have seen in StarCraft 2, where the game is able to be played even though all the content hasn't been downloaded yet. Is it a system like we saw in Guild Wars 1 and 2, for instance? This is technology that's, of course, around on PC, but allowing that to work on all titles is kind of a big deal. I mean, I would love to see that on Steam, for instance. Not having to download all 24 gigabytes of this game before I start playing, that would be pretty great. And then have the rest download in the background. They mentioned a separate dedicated CPU to allow downloads even while the system is turned off. That I very much like. Currently, my PlayStation 3 wakes up at about 4 in the morning, goes and decides to download some updates, which is a nice feature, don't get me wrong. I just prefer that it didn't terrify me every time it happened. So this seems like a potentially good thing, but the lack of backwards compatibility compounds a potential launch lineup problem. The reason that systems are backwards compatible is because they give people an incentive to switch over to the new system earlier because they know they can still use their old lineup. So, okay, you drop in $300-$400 on whatever this console is. The price hasn't been given out yet, by the way. There's been some speculation and reports, but we don't know for sure. We'll probably find this out at E3. And you're thinking, all right, $300-$400, I can still play my old games, I can do some cool stuff, and there's maybe a couple of games in the launch lineup that are pretty good or coming out soon after. So, yeah, why not? I'll switch over. I'll be an early adopter. There's no harm in it, right? I can still play my old games, and they're going to keep releasing those games, so I can go and just buy a bunch of PS3 games, and I can still have some entertainment, just retire my PS3 and shove it away in the attic. And yet they're saying there will not be direct backwards compatibility. Now, people are arguing, oh, well, cloud system is backwards compatibility. No, it isn't. That's not what backwards compatibility is. You might as well say my PC is backwards compatible with the Super Nintendo because I can get an emulator. It's not the same thing at all. Backwards compatibility is where you can take your PS3 disc, shove it in the machine, and have the hardware in your system run that game. More often than not, that actually involves parts of the previous console being incorporated into the existing one. The Emotion engine used to be included in the PS3. They took that out in future iterations of it cost them a lot more money to actually have this thing. And there's plenty of other examples of that. The 360, I believe, used a kind of software emulation wrapper of sorts, but the direct emulation was happening on PS3, and of course PS3, the earlier versions of it, the big fat ones with the Emotion Engine, were compatible with every PlayStation 2 disc, because you essentially had a PlayStation 2 inside of your PlayStation 3. This is not happening this time around. There's a few reasons for this, but the most important would be cost. The PlayStation 3, of course, was $599 when it came out. It was more expensive in the UK. It was like double the price in Australia for some crazy reason. It was an expensive machine, and when they redesigned it, they took the Emotion Engine chip out of it so that they were able to reduce costs overall. So this may mean that this thing releases, and it's a pretty powerful console, and it doesn't cost anywhere near as much as the PlayStation 3 did, but we don't know that for sure yet. The problem is that this could vastly stifle the early adoption. That's almost a terrifying prospect, really, for some people. They can't trade in their PlayStation 3, for instance. They can't sell it off in order to get a PlayStation 4 because they can't play their old games on it. Now, the possibility, and this is speculation, by the way, we don't know if this is true, is that putting a PlayStation 3 disc into your machine would automatically activate the Gaikai streaming system and allow you to stream the game, and it would verify that you own it by the fact that there's a disc in the drive. That sounds great, except it's very unlikely they'll actually do it because there's a huge amount of cost associated with it. I would imagine that if they do that, then they would charge a subscription fee or maybe make it part of PlayStation Plus. The thing about PlayStation Plus is that it's already really good value anyway, so I would have to think that they would add it on. They would make something more expensive out of it. Why would they just set up a huge farm of cloud servers just to stream PlayStation 3 games that you already own? That doesn't make any business sense. And don't get me wrong, it would be really nice for consumers, but I'm not going to make an assumption that Sony's going to do that. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not going to make them any money. Now, aside from that, the other technical features don't really give us a huge amount of information. We know there's going to be 8 gigs of RAM on this thing. They made the claim that was 8 gigs of GDDR5, which is a curious choice considering that's the stuff you usually find on GPUs. I have to wonder how exactly that's going to work. It seems like that's most likely shared memory as well. It's a decent amount of RAM. That's, of course, a big jump from the 512 megs that you will find in PlayStation 3, which has 256 megs of system memory, then 256 for the actual video itself. Once again, please do not make silly assumptions about memory on consoles. It does not work the same way at all. It is very hard to compare the two. It's a completely different device. But what I can say is that putting that much in the system sounds pretty good. I mean, that's the kind of thing that would really help in terms of, say, texture resolution. You'll often find that the ability to stream high-resolution textures is dependent on video RAM and just raw power that you can get from that. So what makes me kind of hopeful is seeing this much supposed GDDR5 on a system like that means that we'll get higher texture quality. It also means that, again, PC ports might end up being better. And of course, if you're playing on a PlayStation 4, which I will be, you know, I buy every console at launch because that's kind of my job. You know, I'm supposed to be informed about this stuff. How can I be informed if I don't own the bloody thing? But it's good news, I suppose, for that. We can hope, of course, that we also see 1080p with good texture quality, at least in the launch titles, although it's definitely hard to say. The games that we saw, well, I don't really want to talk about them this episode, because I think I can go into them maybe on a future one, or we can just talk about them on the podcast tomorrow. They looked okay, certainly. They didn't look absolutely astonishing, but then again, I just played Crysis 3, so yeah. Alright, what else do we know about this thing? What really got me was they showed the Dualshock 4 off, and it looks very similar to what we saw the prototype of. It's got that front touchscreen, which is a little weird, I think. A rear touchpad definitely makes sense, because it's easier to reach with your middle fingers, for instance. A front touchpad is very odd, because when you usually hold a controller like that, you have your thumbs on the thumbsticks, and then you've got your first finger on the bumpers, and then potentially your second one on the trigger. You can move those around, though. You don't necessarily need to be using all of those fingers at once, so you could use your middle finger to reach around the back of the pad and actually use the touchpad, but what finger are you going to use to activate the touchpad in a traditional game on the front? That doesn't really make any sense. I'm trying to think of that. What would you do? Headbutt it? Use your nose? And what is the point of that? I could definitely see it for browsing menus, using stuff like Netflix, for instance, browsing the net, because if you make the controller properly, you could hold it in one hand, and then you could just use your fingers on the right hand there to use the touchpad to navigate stuff. That's potentially cool, but I don't necessarily see the application in games. I can definitely see it with a rear touchpad, not necessarily with the front. They also showed a motion sensor, which appears to be a stereoscopic PlayStation Eye. Looked very much like a Kinect, only black and a little bit uglier, although less creepy. And it seems like the Dualshock 4 pairs with that in some way. The question is how. They didn't explain that in any way, shape, or form. The only sight of motion controls anywhere in the conference itself was from Media Molecule, who did... I don't even know what that was. I can't really explain it. It was bizarre, and you should just watch it for yourself and try not to burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all. But my god, I love Media Molecule. They're off their rockers and insane, demented, crazy creative people. Just, I don't even know. That was really weird. But there you go. Anyway, we don't know anything else about this because they didn't actually show it, which is very, very curious indeed. The actual design of the controller, it looks like they have concave thumbsticks. I love that. That is very, very good indeed. Much better than the thumbsticks on the Dualshock 3. Really happy about that. Allows you to grip it better. It's more comfortable in my opinion. And I'm also glad that they're not completely reinventing the wheel. This thing also includes a share button. Now, it's hard for me to actually complain about another button on the controller. More buttons is good, in my opinion. But the share button is designed to allow you to share gameplay moments. It seems like the system tracks what you've been doing, so it kind of records stuff on the fly and then allows you to sort of cut, encode, and export something out. Also seems like you can do screenshots and a few other different things. They did mention a lot of social connectivity, which has turned a lot of people off because they're hermits, and I don't blame them. That's fine. I like to be a gaming hermit. I remember my best time as a gaming hermit, actually, was when I moved down to Sheffield. I just finished university, moved down to Sheffield to find some jobs, and what did I get? Well, I got a month of no internet because it took them ages to connect it. So what did I do? I sat in my bedroom for a month with the curtains closed, playing Oblivion on the 360. Yeah, so those hermit moments are pretty fantastic. They probably shouldn't last for a month. That's very unhealthy. Don't do it. I think I was eating nothing but Chicago Town microwave pizza. It's not good. It's bad. Very bad. Anyway, I think that it seems a lot of this stuff, or hopefully all of it, can be turned off. And all of the social stuff with the PlayStation 3, for instance, don't need it. Irrelevant. Even with the Vita, which is like, oh, you want to share this? No. You can turn all that off. It's fine. As long as you can continue to turn all that off, that's great. I don't want my friends list integrated with my Facebook. My Facebook is a lost cause. I have like 5,000 friends on my Facebook. I know maybe 3 of them. So I don't use Facebook at all. It's pretty much pointless for me. So I want a separate friends list, because if I do want to do multiplayer gaming on the console, which is unlikely, that's not usually the kind of thing that I do, then I want to do it without having to worry about all of these people. It's like, hey, I knew you like 10 years ago, or I randomly added you, I saw you at this thing, do you want to play video games with me? And I know that sounds harsh, but it's like when you have so many people doing that, it can get really irritating. And when you're sitting on a console, you might just want to play alone, and you don't necessarily want any of this other nonsense. I don't mind the features being there, that's fine. Being able to stream directly to Ustream is kind of hilarious. I bet Twitch kind of shat its pants on that one. The thing about Ustream, I suppose, is that it hasn't really been used for gaming for ages. I guess they're going to put a really big push on this now. You can still stream to Twitch if you use a capture card or anything like that, but it seems like by default you'll be streaming to Ustream. Good, more competition for Twitch. Excellent. We might see higher CPMs, we might see better service, we may see more features. Competition is a good thing. Very good thing indeed. So this is a good move by Sony, in my honest opinion. As long as I can just get away from all of that. I was looking at the kind of dashboard they put up there, which looked very much like the Windows 8. What do they call them? Those kind of panels? I don't even know. I don't like it. I haven't switched to Windows 8 kind of as a direct result of that, even though I know you can turn it off. But that looked kind of messy. I don't really want news and friend stuff being thrown at me on my console. What I want to do is I want to load up my console. I want to play my game, or I want to watch Amazon Instant Video or Netflix. I want to go to the PlayStation Store. I want to download a demo. I want to play a game. I want to buy content. I don't want to be pestered by all of that stuff. I don't care if Joe Blogs just did a massive, crazy 360 no-scope MLG Pro XXX kill on Little Big Planet karting. I don't care about that stuff. That's irrelevant to me. I don't want it pestering me, that's fine. If I wanted that stuff pestering me, I'd go on YouTube. There's plenty of it there. So the hope is that you can turn that kind of stuff off. So I'll talk more, I think, about the games maybe in the next show, because we did see quite a lot there, and talk about the overall technology in comparison to the current power of a high-end gaming PC based on the footage that we actually saw. I think overall the conference was pretty good. They got a lot of very interesting and cool people up there. Mark Kearney is fantastic. I mean, this guy's been in the industry for so long. He's the guy behind Marble Madness, which is just an incredible game. Man, that game came out when I was born. Good lord, that's a long time ago. But Mark Kearney delivered a passionate speech. It was awkward, but hey, he's a developer. You know, he's not a frontman for a frickin' metal band. This guy is just great at what he does. They brought Dave Perry out, which is kind of a squee moment for me because he's responsible for a lot of the earlier shiny stuff, including Earthworm Jim, some of my favorite games ever made. They also brought out Jonathan Blow, which was surprisingly not as pretentious as I expected it to be. It's like, yeah, we want to make this game. It's kind of like a puzzle open world game. Here's a look at it. This is The Witness. And so on and so forth. They did well, I think. They focused mostly on the games. There was very little mention of anything that wasn't gaming related. There was also depressingly not an awful lot about the PlayStation Vita or anything like that, but they focused on games, they showed a lot of stuff, and it seems interesting, and it looks like a decent machine. It looks like it's a decent advancement on the PlayStation 3. Admittedly, the difference between, say, the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 doesn't look like it's as extreme as between the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3, right? Anyway, there you go, folks. A roundup of some of the hardware-related stuff that we saw at the PlayStation 4 conference. I'll probably talk about games in a future show. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you for watching the Content Patch, and I will see you next time.